January 17, 1945, the Ardennes forest, Belgium. The snow falls in silence, thick and relentless, blanketing the shattered pines and frozen earth where men have died by the thousands. A German Oberst, a colonel, stands in a captured stone farmhouse, its windows blown out, its walls pocked with bullet holes. Before him, spread across a wooden table scarred by shrapnel, lies a collection of American field manuals, tactical maps, and after-action reports salvaged from overrun positions. His breath mists in the frigid air as he turns the pages with fingers stiff from cold and something else, a reluctant admiration he cannot yet name. Outside, the remnants of his regiment dig into frozen positions, their faces hollow, their uniforms patched and threadbare. The sound of distant artillery rolls like thunder through the valley. He closes his eyes and listens, and in that moment he understands that the war he trained for, the war his doctrine promised, has become something unrecognizable. For 4 years, the Wehrmacht had moved across Europe with a speed and precision that stunned the world. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, had shattered the French, encircled the British, and driven deep into the Soviet heartland. German officers were taught that war was a science of maneuver, of mass and momentum, of striking decisively with concentrated force at the enemy's weakest point. Their doctrine emphasized centralized command, hierarchical discipline, and the supremacy of the officer corps. The German soldier was trained to follow orders, to execute the plan, to trust in the brilliance of his superiors. It was a system built on Prussian tradition, on the legacy of Moltke and Clausewitz, on the belief that genius resided at the top and obedience below. When the Americans arrived in North Africa in 1942, the Germans watched with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. Here was a nation of shopkeepers and factory workers, of jazz musicians and Hollywood actors thrown hastily into uniform and shipped across an ocean. Their early performance at Kasserine Pass seemed to confirm every prejudice. Green troops panicking under fire, commanders fumbling coordination, units scattering in disarray. The German officers nodded knowingly. This would be over quickly. But something unexpected happened. The Americans did not break, they learned. And what they learned changed the mathematics of the war. By the winter of 1944, as German forces staggered back toward the Rhine, their officers began compiling reports that grew increasingly urgent, increasingly troubled. These were not the propaganda assessments of Berlin, but the field observations of men who had faced American units in the hedgerows of Normandy, the forests of the Vosges, the frozen hills of the Ardennes. One such report, filed by a senior officer of the 352nd Volksgrenadier Division, noted with clinical precision: the American infantry operates with a degree of tactical autonomy unknown in our own formations. Junior officers and even enlisted men make decisions that, in the Wehrmacht, would require consultation with regimental command. This results in a responsiveness and adaptability that our doctrine does not anticipate. Another, from a panzer commander near Aachen, observed, "When we eliminate an American officer, the unit does not collapse. Another leader emerges immediately, often a sergeant or corporal, and the attack continues without pause. It is as if each squad contains multiple commanders." What the Germans were witnessing was not chaos, but a revolution in military thought. The United States Army had entered the war with doctrine borrowed from European powers, but American officers quickly realized that their citizen soldiers, men who had worked on farms, managed businesses, fixed automobiles, and solved problems independently in civilian life, brought a resourcefulness that could not be drilled out of them. Rather than fight this tendency, American commanders weaponized it. Squad leaders were trained not merely to follow orders, but to understand the commander's intent and achieve it through whatever means the situation demanded. Fire team leaders were taught to read terrain, to identify fields of fire, to maneuver without waiting for permission. The result was an infantry force that operated less like a machine and more like a living organism, adapting instantaneously to the chaos of combat. The Germans had expected to face an enemy that would fight as they did, in rigid formations according to established doctrine, waiting for orders from above. Instead, they encountered something far more dangerous, an enemy that improvised constantly, that refused to behave predictably, that turned every engagement into a fluid puzzle with no fixed solution. In the hedgerows of Normandy, where ancient earthen walls created natural fortifications every 100 meters, German commanders positioned forces to repel frontal assaults along predictable axes. American squads would probe, encounter resistance, and immediately shift. One fire team suppressing while another maneuvered to flank, often without radioing for permission, sometimes without officers present at all. A German after-action report from the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division recorded the frustration. The enemy does not commit to a single line of attack. They flow like water, finding gaps we did not know existed. When we reinforce one position, they are already striking another. This decentralization terrified German officers trained to believe that control meant survival. In the Wehrmacht, initiative was praised in theory but punished in practice. Deviation from orders could result in court-martial, even execution. German soldiers learned to wait, to confirm, to seek approval. American soldiers learned to act. The cultural difference was profound. An American sergeant named Bill McClure, operating near St. Lo in July 1944, later described the philosophy in his diary. "Lieutenant told us the objective, a stone barn on the ridge, didn't tell us how to get there, figured we'd know what to do when the shooting started, and we did." This was incomprehensible to a Wehrmacht officer. How could an army function without explicit orders? How could a sergeant make tactical decisions reserved for staff-trained officers? Yet it worked, and it worked devastatingly well. The symbol of this difference, noted again and again in German reports, was the American rifle squad itself. Where a German squad operated as a single unit centered around the machine gun, with riflemen serving primarily as ammunition carriers and security, the American squad was divided into two autonomous fire teams, each capable of independent maneuver. This meant that when one team was pinned down, the other was already moving, creating a constant rhythm of suppression and assault that gave the enemy no respite, no moment to reorganize. A German infantry manual captured in early 1945 contained marginal notes from an officer who had faced American units in the Hürtgen forest. "They do not fight as we do. They do not mass and charge. They probe continuously, feeling for weakness. When they find it, the exploitation is immediate and violent. We cannot respond quickly enough." The note was underlined 3 times. By late 1944, German intelligence officers were circulating captured American field manuals with annotations that betrayed a grudging respect bordering on alarm. The American emphasis on small unit leadership, on training every soldier to think tactically rather than merely obey, produced a qualitative advantage that German numbers and experience could not overcome. One Wehrmacht training document from December 1944, intended to prepare units for the Ardennes offensive, warned, "American infantry must not be underestimated. Though individually less disciplined than our own troops, their junior leaders display remarkable initiative. Expect enemy squads to operate independently for extended periods without higher direction. Expect rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. Expect unconventional responses to standard tactics." The document concluded with a chilling assessment. The American soldier fights not for ideology or obedience, but for his comrades and his own judgment. This makes him unpredictable and therefore dangerous. What the Germans could not articulate because their entire military tradition rejected it was that American tactics were an expression of American culture itself. a society built on individual liberty, on the belief that authority must be earned rather than imposed, on the idea that ordinary people possessed both the right and the capacity to make decisions. This society produced soldiers who brought those assumptions into combat. The American squad was a democracy in miniature, where rank mattered less than competence, where a private with a good idea could shape the course of an engagement, where leadership emerged organically rather than being assigned from above. This was antithetical to everything the Wehrmacht represented, and it worked precisely because it was antithetical. There were moments when this clash of philosophies crystallized into something almost poetic in its irony. Near Bastogne, during the desperate winter fighting, a German battalion commander sent a patrol to probe American lines under cover of fog. The patrol encountered an isolated American squad, 10 men, no officer, cut off from their company. The Germans expected surrender or panic. Instead, the squad immediately broke into coordinated fire teams, using terrain the Germans had not bothered to study, executing a fighting withdrawal that cost the patrol 6 men and gained the Americans time to call in artillery. The surviving German NCO reported they had no officer, they had no communication with higher command, yet they fought with more coordination than our own platoons. I do not understand how this is possible. His commander's marginal note on the report read simply, "Neither do I." The transformation in German assessments was not immediate, but it was inexorable. Early dismissals of American troops as soft or incompetent gave way to wary acknowledgement, then to something approaching dread. By the spring of 1945, German officers spoke of American infantry with the same cautious respect they had once reserved for Soviet shock troops or British commandos. But there was a difference. Soviet troops overwhelmed through mass and fanaticism. British troops excelled through discipline and professional training. American troops won through something harder to define and impossible to counter, a culture of distributed intelligence, of empowered individuals working toward a common goal without sacrificing their capacity for independent thought. It was the antithesis of totalitarianism, and on the battlefield it proved superior. The Oberst in the farmhouse sets down the captured manuals and walks to the shattered window. Outside, his men huddle around fires made from broken furniture, their faces gaunt, their spirits broken not by a single defeat, but by the accumulation of 1,000 small failures against an enemy that refused to fight predictably. He thinks of his training at the War Academy, of the lectures on Cannae and Sedan, of the confidence with which his instructors dismissed American military capability. He thinks of the reports now crossing his desk daily, reports that catalogue not German victories but German confusion. The Americans do not fight, as an army should fight. They do not wait for orders. They do not follow the rules. And because they do not follow the rules, they cannot be beaten by those who do. He does not know it yet, but within weeks he will be a prisoner, marching west through mud and rain toward a camp where he will spend months trying to explain to fellow officers what went wrong, how an army built on the finest military traditions of Europe was undone by farmers and mechanics who made decisions for themselves. Some will never understand, some will cling to the old certainties, blaming betrayal and supply shortages and the weight of Allied materiel. But a few, a very few, will grasp the deeper truth, that the Americans won not despite their lack of traditional discipline, but because of it. That a culture which trusted its common soldiers to think, to adapt, to lead from any position, created a military force more resilient and more dangerous than any amount of drill and doctrine could produce. In the end, the war was decided not by tanks or aircraft or even industrial might, though all those mattered. It was decided by 10 men in a frozen forest, surrounded and outnumbered, who looked at each other and decided without an officer's permission what to do next, and did it. It was decided by sergeants who read the terrain and changed the plan, by privates who who saw an opportunity and took it, by 1,000 small moments of initiative that doctrine could not predict and hierarchy could not contain. The Germans built an army to execute brilliance from above. The Americans built an army where brilliance could emerge from anywhere. In the crucible of the Western Front, that difference mattered more than all the rest. The snow continues to fall, silent and indifferent, covering the tracks of armies that passed this way, covering the blood and the spent shell casings and the frozen bodies that will not be found until spring. The Oberst turns from the window and begins to write his final report, knowing that no one in Berlin will believe it, knowing that it no longer matters. The war is over in all but name. The future belongs to those who trusted their citizens to be more than obedient. It always did.